Hi, my name is Trevor Hikes. I'm one of the customer engineering leaders out of Google Cloud in the Southeast. At Google Cloud, we have many differentiators that sets us apart, so I want to quickly mention a few. Google was the first company of our size to match electricity consumption with renewable energy, and we're the only major cloud provider to buy enough renewable energy to cover all our operations. So using Google Cloud gives you net operations emissions of your cloud usage to zero, and the electricity used is matched by 100% renewable energy. We have best-in-class security from device to data center. Google Cloud has one of the largest, or if not the largest, privately managed global network. Unlike other cloud providers, your data is not transferred over the public networks, which increases performance and security. Our goal is to minimize risk of our customers being exposed to the public internet. We're also the only cloud provider that encrypts 100% of data at rest across all platform services by default. We also enable choice with our hybrid and multi-cloud solution. You can use your data where you want and how you want it. With Anthos, you can deploy on existing hardware, allowing on-prem apps to leverage various cloud providers during burst workloads without vendor lock-in. You can also connect legacy applications with our Apigee API management platform. And as the #1 contributor to Cloud Native Computing Foundation and the creator of Kubernetes, we will help you avoid being locked in anywhere. With Google Cloud, you can be fully managed with no ops. BigQuery automatically scales to thousands of cores in seconds. You can click to deploy with our GCP marketplace using Kubernetes applications that can be deployed without writing code. Automatic discounts and right sizing delivers 35% savings on average for compute workloads. And finally, with our new AppSheet service, it will empower anyone to build powerful applications and digitize processes without writing code. We also provide embedded AI and ML within our services. AutoML and BigQuery ML enables teams without data scientists to use AI ML capabilities not offered by competitors. With our AI ML and advanced analytics, you can maximize the insights you derive from your data, keeping you agile to make smarter decisions, enabling you to prepare for the future. Our industry-specific solutions and our unique services can accelerate your transformation, and we will ensure your success by bringing the best of Google. With that, I would like to introduce our moderator for this session, Todd Siegler, Regional Vice President at Salesforce.
Hi, my name's Todd Siegler. I'm an RVP at Salesforce, and today I'll be the moderator for accelerating modern app development through the cloud. I want to thank all of you for joining us this morning at the Georgia Technology Conference. And today I'm joined by a couple panelists, Joyil Joseph, who's an IBM Distinguished Engineer focused on hybrid cloud, and Rob Thomas, who's an SVP for Research and Development at Manhattan Associates. So I appreciate you both joining me this morning.
Great to be with you.
Same here.
So I thought we'd start with just some opening thoughts about the cloud's effects on developing applications, because they're so numerous. So maybe Joyil, start with you.
Yeah, I mean, one big change which cloud has brought into the table is it's around the speed in which we deliver, right? So earlier, and the change in the architecture. So in the past, we have seen enterprises building some of the core systems on monolith platforms like mainframe as an example, or over time, it evolved to, let's say, newer application servers like WebSphere application server or WebLogic application server. And pretty much the scaling factor was determined by that monolith which was built. All functionalities were embedded into that monolith, right? And that had an impact on speed to market, if you will. Releasing new features had a time frame of its own. And if it was a pretty older architecture, you had to depend on things like batch windows as an example, right, in order to release new features or make changes to your system. Now, the beauty of cloud is the dynamicity which it brings to the table, right, with DevSecOps, right? So when I say DevSecOps, as all of you know, it is about optimizing your development capabilities, operations capabilities, and also how do you ensure security is embedded throughout the life cycle, right? So that's what DevSecOps brings to the table. So the automation capabilities of DevSecOps, the process changes which DevSecOps enables, and the people factor as well, right? So with cloud, we have started adopting more and more agile ways of working, right? How do you adopt agile as a methodology for your application development? How do you ensure features are released faster? How do you ensure features are released in line with the requirements, right? So you have a lot of stakeholder involvement coming into play versus building the system and towards the end getting it validated by the stakeholder. It's all about co-creation, co-execution, and cooperation, right? That's how I would like to state this change which the cloud has brought into the table when it comes to app development.
Rob?
I think it's important with anything, Joyil mentioned architecture. It's important to understand what your objectives are. In our cloud journey, we stepped back and said, okay, speed of innovation was number one, high availability was number two. And the third component was elasticity, because in the supply chain space, you tend to have, perhaps many months where you're kind of at a steady state, and suddenly there's significant increases in load and in volume. And so the ability to manage all that and handle that, and the cloud is uniquely positioned to do that. The ability of virtual machines, containerization, the ability to add resources incredibly fast when you need it to scale up and to scale down. But the key thing is you do have to rethink your applications to do that. You have to embrace that architecture, and it's not something that you can just necessarily bolt on the outside. So you've got to really think about these objectives and really kind of bite the bullet to do a major redevelopment for major applications.
And a follow-up question would be, and Rob, this is a point you brought up a little bit earlier when we spoke this morning, was that these legacy solutions, they often developed obviously as point solutions for a particular function with an API second philosophy, where it really wasn't embedded, it became bolted on maybe. And would love to get some more of your thoughts on that.
Well, I think with more legacy systems that were developed in that kind of monolith architecture, the best place for most folks to integrate with that was at the database level, right? Because the database was the single point that unified the application. It was also usually data models were well defined. There's some dangers with that, of course, going around the application, but a lot of integration would occur at that database level, and there are those problems with it in terms of it being designed to do that. If you're going to redevelop your application and you think about this cloud-centric, highly available application, by chunking your application up into these components and basically ensuring that everything is API based, the integration between all components has to be API based in order to provide that backwards compatibility, that ability to upgrade one component while the other components continue to perform. And so you have to move to an API centric system. And once you do that, not only does it help you with your internal integrations across your components in terms of managing that effectively, but now you have the opportunity to expose those interfaces out to the world. So everyone can effectively use those interfaces, well-defined, REST services.
And just to add to Rob's thought, Todd, I mean, the microservices architecture and the APIfication, that interconnected architecture is good, right? And what accelerates that is the capabilities which cloud brings to the table, right? And when I say cloud, it's hybrid cloud, right? And that includes a container platform, which Rob touched upon earlier as well, right? How quickly can you make changes? How quickly can you make sure your deployments happen without impacting your business, right? That's also an essential piece of this transitional journey, if you will. Just wanted to highlight that part. So it's hybrid cloud, which essentially brings the value, right? Along with container platforms, ensuring you're able to deploy your applications on-premise, on public clouds, on a combination of both, and having a single pane of glass, right? To manage and monitor and run these applications, if you will.
Yeah, and the cloud has really changed relationships of employees in different roles across the organization. I think that all of us have noticed that it used to be the business had a need and an idea of what they wanted to do, and they would hand it off to the IT team and the development team to go create it. And I think that we've all seen this more flexible work environment where the teams are able to better interact and hopefully to execute at the end of the day. Would love to hear both how this is affecting your organizations internally, as well as what you're seeing with your customers.
Well, when you think about agile development, right, the standard week or 2-week sprint, you can do that inside a larger development cycle. And prior to moving to the cloud, our release cycle was yearly. Now, internally, we would go through weekly and bi-weekly sprints to basically try to do exactly what you were saying, to try to tease out the requirements and try to understand what we needed to deliver. But that's kind of an internal thing. And it's not till the release, gets to the customer that you find out, did you understand everything correctly? And one of the beauties of the cloud in terms of being able to leverage the capability is that now, every 2 weeks or every month or every quarter, we're not delivering internally, we're delivering to the customer, and we're getting real-time feedback. And it's feedback that we can, in real time, weeks, adjust. It goes back to delivering a minimal viable product, and then taking that feedback and being able to iterate rapidly over it.
Right. And it's also a mindset shift, right? I mean, when I say about that is, earlier we used to have like two different teams, one team developing the application, then you hand it over to the operations team who would be managing our applications in the production environment, right? So that's converging now, right? So it's all about, you write the code, you manage your code kind of concept, right? That's where we are moving towards. So it's one pizza size squad, right? I would say, when I say that 8-member squad, right, who manages the end-to-end life cycle of that particular application. So it's more of a product thinking, product mindset, which comes into play rather than just applications and operations kind of mindset, right? And infrastructure. So that's a big evolution and change which we see happening, which essentially adds to the speed, which we are all talking about, right? So
that's a huge cultural shift, and it took us a while to go through that shift, because in the standard, take a year to deliver a product, and then it takes another 6 months before a customer gets it. You're 2 years between when a developer checks something in and when you actually maybe get some feedback. With this model, I tell developers, when you check in your code, add your cell phone number, to the comment line, right? Because we'll be calling you in a week, if this thing doesn't go well in production.
Yeah, real-time feedback, literally.
Yep.
Cell phone number, right in the application. So with cloud, we've seen a big, and Joyil, you were touching on this a little bit earlier, this big architectural shift, and not just from the architecture, but also from security perspectives. And so I ask it sort of a two-part question is, how it's changed architecturally from sort of legacy where we were. Obviously, you're ordering equipment, you're setting it up. It's a time-consuming task. Security applications, Rob, you mentioned this was more on the customer, and to this cloud continuous automated journey that we're all on.
Yeah, and in my view, right, one of the biggest inhibitors for enterprises adopting cloud during the initial part of cloud was the security and compliance, right? Because you didn't want to take many of your secured workloads because you're not pretty sure of whether it would be hacked or would it run as it behaves on-premise, right, on a cloud. So that's why 80% of your workloads, if you look across the enterprises, are still within on-prem, right? So that is changing and rapidly changing, right? And as you can all attest to that. But that is one of the inhibitors, right? So all these cloud providers, as well as the service integrators, right, and product manufacturers started focusing on this particular aspect, right? How do you ensure that your applications are secure on the cloud? And when you say secure, there are multi-level of security, right? And one is definitely your regulatory compliance, right? How do you ensure that you are complying with your governance and regional compliance aspects of it, if you will, and also the industry compliance requirements. That's one aspect. The second is data, right? So all applications carry data along with them, right? And you have data at rest, you have data in transit, but then there's the third category, right, which we talked about as data in use. We didn't have too much focus on data in use in the past. People have tried to protect your transit data and the data at rest, right? But it's important to also protect your data when it's in use, especially when it's running on an external, let's say, data center provided by cloud, as an example, right? So there's a lot of enhancements which has happened in this space in order to ensure that your data security is 100%, right? So that kind of, and again, this effort is not just by the cloud providers as we are discussing in the morning, right? It's more about a combination, right? An ecosystem, right? How do you create an ecosystem between your cloud providers, let's say a service integrator like IBM, and let's say new partners, right? So if you take the banking industry, fintechs are evolving, right? And retail industry has a lot of new models coming out. So how do you kind of bring everybody together to get this consortium to kind of define security requirements, because it needs to support the future ecosystem. So that has been a focus area for a lot of cloud providers, and that has advanced a lot, right? So that essentially brings in a lot of security elements when you're deploying your applications to cloud. The third point is around DevSecOps, right? And you don't want to manually go and validate security in each of your layers of your application, right? Starting from infrastructure, storage, to, let's say, databases, to operating system. Each of those layers have vulnerability, let's say, options, if you will, right? I mean, so how do you protect all these layers, right? So unless you automate it, you're not going to get the speed with which you want to deploy your applications, build your applications, release new features. And that's where DevOps has been transformed to DevSecOps, right? You introduce the security aspects very integrally into the overall automation pieces, if you will. And all these pieces of security are automated, starting from your requirements, ensuring that your requirements are reviewed to make sure there are no security vulnerabilities in what you're defined as requirements, then taking to design, to code, to test, to deploy, right? And even run, right? So all those aspects are automated, done in a proactive fashion. So that's how cloud kind of takes care of this in an automated fashion and brings more credibility, if you will, right? That's how I look at it, Todd.
Hey, Todd, if I could add a comment, you mentioned about infrastructure. When we sell to a customer that's going to put our application on-prem, the way we go is we basically ask them, okay, what is the 1 hour that is your busiest hour of the year? And we figure out what the hardware required is for that, including high availability and everything. Then we add 30% buffer, and we say, that's what you need to go buy. By the time they procure it, it comes in, they set it up, they install the basic system software, operating system, network. We're talking months. Today, because of the cloud, we can deliver a complete solution in 2 hours, and that's a running application. And back to your security point is when you look at security, I mean, obviously application security is very important, and that's something that has to be a part of your process in terms of static scanning, dynamic scanning. But 99% of security is configuration. And the beautiful thing about infrastructure as code is you can get that configuration correct and then just repeat it. Not only that, but if you find a problem, you can fix it once. And again, just repeat it. So, that really, I think falls, well into the security mindset.
Yeah, and that standardization of security, it's very interesting that for a long time, when cloud was first coming to the world, everybody was very nervous about security, but it actually has simplified it a lot because, in the old world, we were managing a huge number of siloed applications, and each of those had their own security methodology. And it just became almost unmanageable and ungovernable. And, with cloud and with, other, technology solutions like SSO, it allows us to manage these a lot easier and in a lot more secure foundation. Just interesting that when cloud started, everybody was so concerned, my data is going to be somewhere else. And I think that the world eventually decided, well, my data is going to be somewhere and it just needs to be secure wherever it happens to be. And cloud really is lending itself to that. So, I wanted to pivot a little into this notion that cloud is democratizing technology. And this is a very broad subject, but specifically to clients and how they're leveraging it and how fast they're able to leverage it. Would love to get your thoughts, and maybe Rob, start with you and then go over to Joyil.
When you mentioned democratization, the couple thoughts came to my mind. The first one was just use of open source. We use, if I look at all the code that we deploy for some of our major applications, easily 70% of it is open source. And the beautiful thing about that is we're able to focus on the business problem, right? Not on the basis of building infrastructure. And in terms of speed, we have many customers that decide that they need to do something and do it quickly from a business imperative perspective, and that speed of deployment, that speed of getting the system ready to be configured from a business perspective. You just, as I mentioned before, you just can't compete with how fast we can do things from a cloud perspective, because it's just code. You're just executing some code, system's up, it's ready, it's available. And then the real work of tailoring it for your specific business to solve your specific business problem, that's what takes the time, and that's what should take the time, right? Not everything that kind of goes around the edges.
Just to add on to what Rob said, right? I mean, definitely it's the speed. The other key element is the experience, right? Which cloud brings to the table. It's again, the end customer experience, the developer experience, your partner experience, right? All those matters, right? Like traditionally when you're doing a project, right? I mean, you'll have to plan it out upfront, right? I mean, who are the partners involved in your project? Whom do you need to integrate with? What is the user experience you need to build, right? And then have a design team working on it separately, right? And then in order to build an application, what are the IDEs you need or integrated development environments, right? So you need to plan that all out for a project, which is a huge project management task, right? But with cloud, everything has evolved to a click of a button, right? So one is, if you look at the developer experience as an example, there are multiple processes, if you will, right, which has evolved in line with cloud, right? I'll start with the infrastructure development, and Rob touched upon infrastructure as a code earlier. Now, how do you make that in a standardized fashion, which Todd, you did mention, right? Standardization is key here. So practices like GitOps as an example, right, has evolved, which essentially looks at your infrastructure as a code and brings a streamlined process on top of it, right? That way, click of a button, you will be able to provision your infrastructure, and that too in a secure fashion, right? The only action which a developer does is do a code commit, right, to a Git repository as an example. So that's one level of experience. The other experience is the ecosystem partners, right? So when, for example, when I'm building an application, there are multiple SaaS offerings which are come into play as an example, right? And then you have your traditional COTS package vendors who are moving towards a SaaS model. So, and they are not going away, right? It's not all custom built. So most of the times you have a hybrid environment, let's say Salesforce as an example on one side, SAP on the other side, and then you need to have an integration platform, right, which exposes the APIs, which keeps this ecosystem together. So traditionally, it used to be a lot of effort, right? I mean, you need to have expertise in each of those places. You need to plan out each of them as a separate project. But with cloud, you have everything available as a service, right? For example, integrations, you have hybrid integration platforms as a service, which makes your API definition and development pretty quick, right? That way you can integrate all your systems. So you have your ecosystem experience enhanced with cloud as well. So experience is an important aspect. Speed is definitely the other one. And third, we touched upon earlier, security, right? So, and we are making a lot of progress in the security space, which enables the whole ecosystem to come together and realize what is beneficial for the enterprise, right?
Yeah, and there's been, I guess the old way of thinking about things was, how do I keep all the versions of every one of my customers, who some are 5, 8, 10 years, behind maybe the current version, and they're a little bit nervous about, okay, I need to do this upgrade. It's going to require a massive amount of work and rework. And it's really interesting how cloud and going to a single code base has changed our focus from almost keeping the current solution working to keeping the current solution focused on user experience, so that that experience becomes better. So Rob, I'd love to start with you on that. I know that that's something that near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, we, for years and years and years, many of our customers would upgrade our application, maybe once every 5 years, just because of the effort required, the testing, the big bang, effectively, of making major changes like that. And that was really one of the things that when we moved to cloud from developing a cloud native architecture, we wanted the ability to push new capability out to customers continuously. And so by embracing kind of the cloud architecture, and also doing a massive change of our development process and changing the culture, and I'll talk about that in a sec. We got to a point now where we deliver code every 2 weeks. We feature flag new capability on every quarter, and that enables us to react, and also our customers to adopt this functionality when they're ready, without having to plan an 8-month project to do it. It's just a matter of change management and turning something on. I will mention that the huge cultural shift that's required from the IT or the development perspective. Where before the developer was focused on, hey, I want to develop new capability, which is still true, but now the focus has to be on application availability, backwards compatibility. That is job one, because if you can't be pushing these new capability into an enterprise system that literally our company is absolutely 100% dependent on for their business, both top line and bottom line revenue, if you're going to break something, right, every time you push new code in. So the amount of automation and testing that you have to do to convince yourself, and then hopefully have the customer experience a zero impact upgrade that occurs very frequently. But that's a huge cultural shift from an organizational perspective, which we've been at this for years, and it's still something we focus on every day.
Right. I think that's a very valid point which Rob mentioned about, right? It's about the non-functionals rather than the functionals, right? There is a shift of focus towards non-functionals, in which cloud brings a lot of ease to it, right? But this has also introduced some new patterns, if you will, right, and new roles into the industry. And the one thing which I would like to highlight is site reliability engineering, right? Because this is a new practice which has come into existence because of all the factors which Rob just mentioned. So when you are developing your applications, which is going to be distributed, right, in a microservices kind of an architecture, how do you ensure that it has the right performance? How do you ensure it has the right availability, right, and high security levels, right? And how do you do real-time monitoring? Too many moving parts which you need to correlate, and that's where the site reliability engineering or SRE practice comes into play, right? So which is a very important aspect which all these enterprises needs to adopt while moving towards, let's say, a cloud-based architecture. Site reliability engineering. And then there are additional practices, right, which helps you kind of make sure your application development is up to speed, right, or done on speed. Things like A/B testing as an example, right? So where you kind of compare your old and new and ensure that you're not breaking any old functionality, and at the same time bringing in new functionality with a subset of users, and then rolling it out seamlessly, right, with blue-green kind of a deployment. So all these come into play in order to kind of enhance that experience aspect, if you will.
Yeah, Joyil and Rob, great points. And just thinking through that in Salesforce, we have very similarly, Rob, about the 3 releases every year for the 20 plus years of our existence. And it's just this regular cadence where the new functionality is available. It's up to the customer when they turn it on. And Joyil, to your point, you can do that sort of that testing where you can enable that functionality for a group of users. It used to be you upgraded everybody all at once. There's no turning back. And if it causes massive disruption, you're almost stumbling versus being able to roll it out in almost a very simple way of testing with a few users, a group of users, and then broader and broader sets. Rob, be curious to get your thoughts there.
Yeah, I can't emphasize enough the importance of incrementalism. Now, we turn on new features quarterly. We've been delivering code about every 2 weeks. And if you look at there's about 40 to 60 containers that are out there, or 40 to 60 components. Every 2-week period, we probably change about half of those. Some of those are bug fixes. Some of those are new capability that are feature flagged off, right? The problem we've seen is if you have a compatibility issue, right? If you start installing that software and there's a problem, you've made too many changes, right? You've changed half your application. So what we've moved to is more of a streaming model, where even though I might deliver code from the development team in 2-week chunks, those 20 components get deployed, maybe over a 2-hour window. Every 2 hours, change a component. And that way, if something goes wrong, or something appears to go wrong because you've got good monitoring, right? You're seeing something start to go south, right? You can say, okay, what changed in the last 2 hours? What changed in the last 4 hours? Roll that back. And that echoes to the A/B, point that Joyil was talking about. So that's, I think the incrementalism is super important, and it's counterintuitive, right? In order to get stability, you want to make more changes more frequently. They just need to be really small.
Yeah, it reminds me of Mark Hawkins, our former CFO. He had this adage of better, never done, which I think is a great way of describing SaaS and cloud, is that you're on a journey, and whether you're, building the solution for your customers or whether you're the customer deploying it, both of them are applicable. You can apply and say, we're never there. It's a journey. and we're continually iterating and innovating and trying different things to see what's most effective and what's most beneficial for our users. Joyil, would love to get some of your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think Todd, you again mentioned an important piece, right, which is innovation, right? So continuous innovation is going to be key for success in the future, right? In the sense, like, you're not building a static application, deploying it, getting it running for like 4 or 5 years. You need to continuously improve it. And to Rob's point, an MVP approach is the most suitable for that, right? You build a minimum viable product, you enhance it with the next increment and keep enhancing it. But that was not easy in the past, right? When you had like predefined infrastructure as an example, those were constraints to do this kind of continuous innovation. That's the benefit which cloud brings to the table, right? So you can dynamically scale your application infrastructure as needed. Like, for example, if a new feature which you're introducing needs additional storage, it's a click of a button, versus earlier it used to be a procurement activity, right? So that's a big change which cloud brings to the table, right? So good platform for innovation. That's what cloud is at the end of the day, right? And fail fast, right? For example, if you don't see success in what you're doing, you don't have to roll back or bear the cost of the infrastructure which you brought. It's a click of a button, decommission it, go back to status quo, right? So continuous innovation, platform to kind of fail fast is very important, right? Those are the key things which, from an innovation standpoint, I see what cloud brings to the table, Todd.
Yeah, great point. And people look at failure oftentimes. I know with my kids, they look at failure as bad, and I look at failure as just natural. Failure happens. How do you react? And if I can learn from things faster, I always say I want to know bad news earlier. If I know it a long time from now, it's more problematic. But if I learn it quickly, then I'm able to actually do something about it, and the impact is far less. That's a great point. So, one of the things that has changed, at least that I've seen change with cloud, is this focus on the customer. And Joyil, your CEO, is a great example of this, where he doesn't just consider customers of IBM as his customers. He considers employees and partners customers. And it's a very, in a world where movement between organizations is, we'll say, the barriers are lower than ever before, I think that that's a really interesting way and good way of looking at your customers, as a leader. Would love to get some of your thoughts on just Arvind and his cultural transformation that he's really driving at IBM.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up that, Todd. I really think that's an awesome way of looking at things, the way Arvind describes it. It's all about solving the problem, right, for our clients, for the enterprises. It's not about who solves the problem, right? It's about how we solve the problem. So there is an ecosystem which forms around it, because nowadays problems are not single dimensional, right? There are multi-dimensional problems which has different aspects to take care of before we can put a full solution to the table. And it doesn't mean IBM can solve all the problems. I'm just taking IBM as an example because I work for IBM, right? So an ecosystem comes into play, right? Because IBM being a hybrid cloud services company or hybrid cloud company with AI, right? We bring those capabilities, but that alone is not going to solve a particular problem for an enterprise. You may have to bring in, let's say, Salesforce, right, in order to manage your customer information and customer management capabilities. You may have to bring an SAP in order to build enterprise level capabilities, and you may have to have an integration platform which is best in class in the market, right? So all these things need to come into play, along with, let's say, design thinking capabilities as an example, right? Because we need to think out of the box to solve the problem. So it's never a one party solving the problem, but it's an ecosystem coming together to solve the problem. And that's the way Arvind looks at it, right? And in the sense, or IBM looks at it. It's about finding the best solution for a particular problem, the unique manner, the high standard manner, and the high quality fashion, right? That's what we want to focus towards, and making our clients successful in the market.
Yeah, and the service solution, which is a combination of our service solutions at Salesforce, Service Cloud and Field Service, combined with Watson, are really a testament and a powerful testament to customer and agent experience. I know that your team regularly demonstrates the environment and you're greeted first with the Watson chatbot. The Watson chatbot actually asks you the basic fundamental questions and starts narrowing down the areas of focus and actually suggests relevant information back to you a couple different times. And if it's not able to answer the question, it moves over to an agent very quickly, but it's a seamless experience. And usually as users, we want a very quick answer. And it's just a great example of how our companies are working together. Rob, I'd love to get your thoughts around just how the customer experience has changed, both at Manhattan Associates, but also with regard to your customers and how that's changed with cloud.
Well, it's interesting. I've done development for a number of companies over my career, and I mean, heads down product development, and most companies kind of hide the development team away, right? You kind of put you put them in the cage, put them in the cave, and don't let anybody get in, right? And I can tell you, and from looking back over my career, there's a lot of comfort in that, right? It's nice in there, nobody bothers you. But when I came to Manhattan 10 years ago, our first principle is focus on the customer, and it's something that it comes from our CEO, Eddie Capel, and it is ingrained throughout the organization, all the way through sales, through services, through R&D. And so I've been more involved with customers in this R&D role than ever before in my career. And the beautiful thing about that is it goes back to what you were saying about learning what works and what doesn't work. I hear it directly. I hear it directly from customers. Hey, this is working, this isn't. And the beautiful thing is, as we transitioned to cloud, was not only could we fix things faster, right, by delivering innovation faster, but we took on the notion of managing the customer, because we're managing their environment. We're managing what they're running their business on. And so we're even more focused on the customer, if that was even possible now. And I think the great thing for our customers there is, and any customer that is using a service, they can focus on that unique special sauce that is going to make their business, successful and competitive, and not work, just on the basic plumbing. So, and the goal is to move that basic plumbing line as far up the value chain as possible. And that's really what, we've strove to do. And, I think it works pretty well, and the customers are able to go fast, and they're able to be successful, which is really all that matters.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that the barriers between, within our own organizations that existed before cloud. And it's really relevant because, with Salesforce, very similarly, and I came in about 8 years ago into the organization. And one of the things that I was really struck by was that there was no barrier. Like, product was tip of the spear, working with our customers all the time. And I would say at Dreamforce, our big conference every year, the most desired sessions, the most requested, are by far with product. And so it almost gives the product teams so much direct feedback. It is so informative to how we develop solutions. I'd love to hear, from both of you, both with IBM and Manhattan, how that continual feedback loop, both within our own organizations, but also then extending to our partners and our customers, how that feedback loop is helping to inform where you guys are going, where your companies are going as an organization.
Right. So again, an important point, right? Continuous feedback from the right stakeholders, right? Which essentially produces the right product. So within IBM, what we have done is we have created an approach and a methodology which we call the garage method, right? Which brings in all these best practices which we have been talking about so far: agile, design thinking, let's say DevSecOps, and continuous feedback is an essential part of it. So we always start with, let's say, a design thinking session, right? Where we bring in all the key stakeholders, because it's not just the IT group or just the business participants. You might even have like a person who is using the application, the end user, right? So we try to get participation from all these groups. The first step is identifying the right personas, right? That's what I just described. So once you have the personas, bring them into a design thinking session where you kind of think together on how you envision the product to be, right? So that essentially gives us a list of hills, which essentially gets translated to your epics or user stories when you start executing it. So it's all coming from a group of minds rather than getting a list of requirements drafted out and then translating that into use cases and building them up, right? So you get the real experience needs coming out through this design thinking sessions. So once you have that, then iteratively developing this and doing playbacks on a regular fashion, right? If you have 2-week sprints to Rob's point, make sure all these personas are involved in seeing these playbacks so that they can give real-time feedback, which gets fed into the backlog and gets realized in the next iteration, right? And what enables you to do it with speed is again DevSecOps. You have the right level of CI/CD automation, testing automation, security automation, right? So you don't have to, the developer team does not have to worry about all these capabilities. And on top of that, what we have done is we have also built a set of code accelerators. There are repeatable things, right? I mean, for example, building a microservices, you need to have an API specification to which your microservice is going to comply with. So auto-generating the code in any language of your choice, as an example, and creating the plumbing for a microservice is a common thing which you do repeatedly. Don't want a developer to spend time doing that. So automate that. Whatever can be automated, try to automate that. And to Rob's point, so that you can just focus on the business logic, right? What needs to be embedded inside your code. So all these are different practices which we have adopted and which we bake under what we call as the garage method, right? To show our differentiation and help clients achieve their targets faster.
And Rob, same thing to you around continual feedback from partners, from customers within your own organization. How's that informing the solutions that you're building?
Yeah. So, we have customer councils, product councils for each one of our products, and it used to be, customers would get together and they would vote on, the most, impactful enhancements they'd like to see in the product. And we would say, well, we're going to put that on the product backlog. And, we're at the beginning of our current release, but maybe the next release next year, we can start working on this, which means you might see it the year after that. So maybe we'll deliver that to you in about 3 years. Right. Now it's, if that capability is important, we can deliver that again, typically within a quarter. So that's a huge change. Customers now realize that they have control. The second thing I would say is that, our first customer in Manhattan is our services team. So, because they're the ones that take the product and configure it and help our customers implement. So we get immediate feedback from our services team, even before a customer perhaps starts, implementing a product. And there's no barriers whatsoever. I mean, I communicate with the head of services about 3 times a week. And we're constantly talking about, well, hey, what's happening at this customer? What challenges are they seeing? What can we learn from it? What can we do different? So it is continual. So it's a pretty exciting time.
Todd, I'd just like to add one more point, right? I just came to my mind listening to Rob, right? Because it's all about the community, right, if you will. So one thing which we are trying to kind of implement within IBM, and we started this journey a year back, is what we call as adopting the open innovation framework, right? I'm sure you're familiar with that. It's about creating a consortium, right, which includes internal participants as well as external participants and influencers, right? And we are creating an ecosystem. And again, I keep using this term ecosystem a lot because that's where our model is evolving towards, right? It's about working together to bring out what is best, right? So in the open innovation framework, so we have a core team which focuses on our products, services internally, but we get continuous feedback from our external partners. We also expose it to our external partners through open sourcing as an example, right? So that they can contribute to that, enhance our services and products so that we get to embellish what we have and take the best to the market. So open innovation framework, I think it's a good idea, which we feel is beneficial, bringing a lot of benefits to us within IBM. So something which maybe all of you could look at as well.
Absolutely. And, Rob, to your earlier point, Salesforce has something called the Idea Exchange, and it's all for customers to give us that immediate feedback. And then for everybody else to say, yes, me too. And they vote with their points that they're assigned. So it's informative to our product team, in addition to our normal client advisory boards and product sessions that they're going to meet with them at Dreamforce or in between just day to day, but really getting the voice of the 100,000 plus customers that we have all the time of what's most relevant to them. And then we talk about retiring Idea Exchange points, and we talk about the number of points that we're retiring because it's directly attributed to the feedback that we're getting. So this feedback loop, I think, is so critical to organizations. It's almost our lifeblood, telling us, yeah, I like where you're going, but I'd like this other thing too. And can you help me out here? So one of the things, Joyil, that you were highlighting is around design thinking. And it's interesting, design thinking, and you work within the GBS organization, big consulting organization, one of the biggest in the world. And it used to be that consulting organizations would come in and they would do the design-led sessions, but product, we'll say, was excluded from that. It was more about where do you want to go and envision it without boundaries, which is a good exercise. What would you do if you were recreating this? If you were recreating your customer experience, what would that look like? And really trying to figure out what that is. But one of the interesting things that we found, and we work closely with IBM on this, is if design thinking has a path, we'll say not a PowerPoint. We're not going to present a PowerPoint at the end of the day, but we're actually going to show you. One of my favorite people at Salesforce always says, you mean like this. So in other words, when you get to that design thinking led session and you get through it, being able to come back with that rapid iterative process of showing them with your solution, with the IBM and Salesforce solution, with Manhattan solution, and saying, you mean like this? Does it look like this? And this speaks to the rapidity. And I know, Rob, you touched on this before. I'd love to have you expound on it a little bit more about how that loop and how design thinking affects product.
Well, it's not just, what I was thinking of when you were making those comments was our services teams, as I mentioned, they work with a customer to configure the solution, but many times they'll come to R&D and say, hey, look, this customer has this problem, and this is how we're thinking of solving it in the application. What do you guys think? And we'll iterate back and forth and say, well, hey, did you think about this? Or why don't you do this? Or why don't you try that? So that's point number one. Point number two is, as much as you can, even though we expose everything as APIs, we try to make the UIs as extensible as possible without code. Extensible by configuration, right? So that way, it's very easy on the back end to add a column to a database, or to an entity, I should say, to a component, since the database is hidden. And then do the same thing on the user experience side to basically try to find, iterate and find that solution pretty quickly. So that, those interactions, continually inform us as to what we're doing, whether, to your point, are we on the right track? Are we on the wrong track? What do we need to do, in the weeks to come?
Yeah, and one of the other things, and we've talked about this a couple times in passing during this conversation, and Rob, you mentioned you would get back to it earlier, so I want to get back to it.
Okay.
Is really around culture. And I think cloud is changing our cultures of our organization, even our cultures of our families, and how we're working together, and how information availability, but also just this. It's not the sales team working just by themselves. It's not the service team working by themselves. It's sort of a family that has a bunch of different parts, all which need to be played. It's about orchestrating it a little bit more harmoniously. So Rob, I'd love you to talk about that a little bit with Manhattan, and then, Joyil, you with IBM.
Real fast. I mean, it's important to know that you're in the family. Okay, and I said, R&D sometimes can get hidden off in the cave. When we delivered our first, cloud application, native application that we were managing, I actually had little tiny mirrors made up, little personal mirrors, and underneath the mirror it said, "Say hello to your newest customer." Right. So you're looking at yourself, because the reality is we were delivering software for the first time to ourselves because we were managing it. Right, we were responsible for it. It had to work, and I think that's just the beginning of that cultural shift of realizing that, hey, the customer and the running of this application is not some abstract idea that lives out somewhere in the universe. Right, it is right here in front of us, and what we do every minute of every day impacts ourselves and impacts our customers, because we are. We're together, we're joined. So I think, that cultural shift is can't be overstated.
Yeah, well, R&D is definitely part of the family, for sure. I always say, we can't do anything, and I've worked as account management for my career, but we need to have something to manage, and you all build it. And so it's the lifeblood of what we all do. And so it's great to shine a light in it on it, and then also just to bring it to the forefront where it's not in the shadows. It's really right at the forefront of what we all do. And Joyil, your CEO, he's a year in, and he came from a research and development background, so near and dear to his heart. Would love to hear about how that's affecting the culture at IBM.
And so one big change or shift is like bringing back the engineering culture, right? So and to me, like cloud is kind of forcing you to do that, right? Rather than more sales focused or being, let's say, delivery focused. I mean, all these are important, but engineering used to take a back step, especially when it comes to services, right? So that is changing now, right? So to me, that's a big shift from IBM standpoint. And we all seen, right, during the pandemic, I mean, our ways of working has changed a lot, right? We never went to offices. We all sat at home. We started delivering projects without any issues, right? High quality, high standards, cloud being a big enabler. But all this shifting towards engineering focus, right, to me is another key driver to make this happen, right? Without all those different assets and capabilities which we built over the past few months, would not, if they were not there, I mean, would not have been able to deliver during this pandemic. So it's a shift, right? So a great change, and I hope this is a change which is going to stay on forever, right? And we shift from the older ways of working. Now we have adopted a new way of working, and which is going to be an optimizer for us going forward.
Well, gentlemen, really appreciate the time today. I want to thank our audience and thank you for attending the Georgia Technology Conference. Really hope you're able to join the other sessions today. And now back to our studio.